Every day they would go to school, and they put an American flag in front of these little babies, Muslim babies.
The end goal of everything that we're talking about is the establishment, the re-establishment of the Islamic form of governance.
عجزنا في هذه البلد معناته خلاص عجزت السلطة.
Our job is to change the Constitution of America.
Either we do it now, or we do it after 100. But this country will become a Muslim country.
I will fight against oppression, and I will die to establish Islam. Assalamu alaikum.
In my mind, the Muslim Brotherhood is the mother of all Islamic organization of the 20th century.
Their utopia is having the law be Sharia.
Anything mentioned in the Quran, they believe in it 100%.
There's no differentiation between religion and politics because religion is politics.
They believe that Western civilization is corrupt, is evil, is decadent, and they want to dismantle it.
Well, listen, thank you very much for the screening, for showing up. I'm sorry that the film probably wasn't as entertaining as the entertainment, but it tells it like it is. And I'm glad that all of you cared enough to show up that this is a serious problem that this country is facing. And unfortunately, the problem is only getting worse in terms of radical Islamic groups posing as moderates, gaining access to political channels, venues, Hollywood, cultural intelligentsia, and framing themselves as part of mainstream America. Their reality is, their real agenda is jihad. And it takes a real concerted effort by people like yourselves, educated citizens, to fight back on a grassroots level to ensure that our politicians, that the media, that our intelligentsia does not get fooled by these groups that pretend to be moderate, that claim their charitable fronts or their apolitical religious are aligned with Hamas, Hezbollah, aligned with the Islamic Jihad, with the Muslim Brotherhood. All of which, of course, you know, have another agenda, which is to impose Sharia, to achieve an Islamic state or caliphate around the world, and take away our real rights of pluralism, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and, of course, destroy our allies, especially the State of Israel. So I ask, do you have any questions? We made the film and what we plan in the future at the Investigative Terrorism. Let's go ahead.
Okay, Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
And audience, you have to know that we're on a Skype connection, so sometimes it breaks a little. You have to be patient. And you have to, if you have a question, we'll acknowledge you, but you have to speak slowly and speak clearly. All right, Ray, I'll start with you.
Yeah, hi, Steve.
Speak up.
In the recent campaign, Operation Protective Edge, against Hamas in Israel, I noticed in this country and around the world, almost exactly what we saw in your movie, which was an incredible media effort in terms of to legitimize Hamas, and ignore all the rockets, ignore all the human shields. Is it in fact a culmination of everything that was in your film in that regard?
I think you call the shots as they are. I have never in my entire life, I've been working in this business now 20 years as a counterterrorist specialist, and before that, 15 years as a journalist. And I tell you that the only thing I really believe in the media are words. The reality is the bias against Israel, ideological, intellectual corruption of the journalists who covered the Gaza-Israeli war was so unprecedented that I myself was shocked nearly every day simply by reading the falsehoods printed in the New York Times or the Washington Post or broadcast on CNN, all of which should have registered as foreign agents of Hamas as far as I was concerned. In fact, Foreign Press Association, which consists of 840 journalists based in Israel and not historically very friendly to Israel, issued 3 weeks ago an unprecedented statement condemning Hamas for its intimidation, threats to, and manipulation of journalists for not on the human shields that Hamas forced the Palestinian in Gaza to serve when they launched rockets from kindergarten, hospitals, UN buildings, civilian apartment buildings. This intellectual corruption was denied by the New York Times or the Washington Post, even though the mainstream Foreign Press Association pulled them out of it. Now, as far as the motivation in terms of what this, I think there was a constellation of reasons. I think by and large, most of the mainstream journalists think that Israel is an imperialist aggressor, an extension of the United States, which they can express it so it's easy to hate Israel. And two, they've been manipulated, threatened, or that simply go into the Stockholm Syndrome, or they've been persuaded by these groups in the United States, like CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which, as you know, is the front group for Hamas, to believe somehow that it's Israel that is the aggressor and that Hamas is the victim. Nothing could be further from the truth. And the fact is, we live in a democracy where these groups have the right to fly. You know, one of the problems that I've encountered is that it's not against the law. People say to me, why can't the FBI stop CARE and all these other groups from perpetrating their lies about the United States, about Hamas and everything? Well, you know, everybody is free to lie in this country. It's a freedom. And it's our responsibility to counter the lies. That's our responsibility. That's one reason why I made this film. I didn't care about being invited to the Georgetown cocktail parties or to the journalist parties. I wanted to make sure the public was aware of what was going on behind the scenes in the media, in Hollywood, in the published world, in television, in Congress itself.
Thank you, Steve. We're going to go on to our next question. Warren?
Yeah.
Speak up.
My name is Warren Revere, and when George W. Bush was president, he claimed that Islam is a peaceful religion that's been hijacked by terrorists. Do you agree with this? You don't?
I think we need a commercial. Let me say this. You know, I have Muslim friends, and some of you even know, you saw them in the film. like Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, Abdul Rahman Mohammed, who are proud to be Muslims, and they are practicing Muslims, and yet they are courageously moderate. They condemn the extremism within their ranks. You know, religions are, in general, abstractions. Islam, Christianity, Judaism, it's what you make and how you interpret them. And in fact, and unfortunately, within Islam, those that represent the, quote, mainstream, end quote, organizations that claim to be the leadership of the Islamic communities around the world actually represent the Muslim Brotherhood groups, disproportionately. Now, I cannot tell you that all Muslims are one way or another. There are no polls that really reflect the reality. But you can't really say that Islam is one thing or another. It's how you practice it. And in that case, to say that it's been hijacked would be wrong. To say that it's inherently evil would also be wrong. It's how you practice, how you interpret it. You know, there are, as you know, there are extremists within Catholicism, in Protestantism, even within Judaism, and we call them out on it. The problem with Islam is that when you call somebody a radical Muslim, immediately these so-called Islamic groups call you out as Islamophobics, as racists. So it becomes impossible to actually call them out as racists, unlike other religions. And that's where the problem lies. We in the West deceive ourselves into believing that somehow the religion has been hijacked and that there are really no radicals within the religion. Well, unfortunately, the reality is totally different. Reality is the mainstream leadership, and I put mainstream in quotes, are dominated by radicals. And they're the ones that espouse jihad or the destruction of Israel. They're the ones, unfortunately, that gain access to the White House, access to Congress, and manipulate the media. And this is a very dangerous situation. It would be equivalent to David Duke and the KKK gaining access to the White House and being represented as a moderate group. Nobody would accept that in the world. But these groups have been able to perpetuate that deception. That's why I call the film The Grand Deception.
Thank you, Steve. Our next question is coming from Janet.
Hi, Steve. I'm Janet Menerick. I just wanted to ask you what your position is, or what you think our President Obama should do in retrospect of what's been going on the last 2 weeks. Is this a declaration of war?
I assume you're referring to ISIS, or are you referring to... Well, I think, unfortunately, when the President held a press conference last week to say that he had no plan yet, I think that was one of the most strategic political demonstrations of failure that I've ever seen in my life. Why would we want to communicate to our enemies that we had no plan and that we had no idea how to combat them? It only emboldened them, number one. Number two, the fact that our own Chief of Staff, Martin Dempsey, stated that they were a group that was posed to become the largest and most strategic threat to the United States ever, obviously meant that we needed, and still need today, not yesterday, not tomorrow, but today, a military strategy to destroy ISIS, because if it's not opposed, the two executions we've witnessed horrifically in the last 2 weeks will be nothing compared to the genocide that they will commit once they achieve a true Islamic state and start conquering the Western-oriented Sunni states like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and UAE to form a much larger state from which they will then attack the West and the United States. And if we wait that long, I can tell you, we will then see World War III.
It's going to be a rough road.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sam Greenberg, and I ask if you draw parallels to, as Diana West points out in her book Betrayal, how the Soviet Union was able to infiltrate all levels of our government and journalism and education to propagate their rise of power of the Soviet Union using the United States. Do you see parallels with radical Islam doing the same thing?
Yeah, I think I see tremendous parallels, except one difference insofar as radical Islam has been far more successful than the Soviets were in terms of perpetuating this deception and manipulating popular culture, educational, political intelligentsia. Ultimately, they were found out and collapsed. At this point, radical Islam, hiding under the deceptive term of being, quote, moderate, or those today, you can see it in mainstream newspapers, these Islamic groups that condemn ISIS suddenly are being described as moderate, even though they are still front groups for Hamas. And Hamas, I want you to know, is no different than ISIS. Not one difference and not one When Hamas lined up 18 people 2 weeks ago, 4 of which were women, and shot all of them in the head in front of 10,000 people on a Friday where people are praying in the mosque, and the thousands of spectators clapped and applauded, that should have been covered in the same horrific way that we covered the 2 executions of the 2 journalists by ISIS. But no, they were treated as if they were, quote, collaborators and somehow deserved to be killed. And then to shame on the media and shame on our own government for not calling out Hamas for its horrific ISIS-like executions.
Thank you. We've got several more. I'll get Bill and then Rob. Go ahead, Bill.
William Horowitz, I just want to quickly ask, I have a coworker who's originally from Pakistan, and I often have talks with him about, why is it that Pakistan and India hate each other? I go through everything, ISIS, Iraq, Sunni, Shiite, all of these things that go on. And it all goes back to what he says, that ultimately it's the British who caused all of these problems because, Pakistan, India used to be British territories, and the British were the ones who created Saudi Arabia. So the root problem to all of this goes back to Great Britain. What do you have to say about this?
His explanation for why there is this conflict is an extension of the conspiratorial beliefs that is widely held in the Middle East, that somehow it's the fault of the United States for all of the conflicts that have erupted there, that somehow if Israel wasn't created, there would be no radical Islam, there would be no conflict within Islam. And yet the fact is, Shiites versus Sunnis have been fighting for 1,400 years, and you see that in Pakistan, you see that in Iran versus Iraq, you see that all over. Number 2, to blame the British, well, I can blame them for a lot of things, but for the creation, this is if anything, he should be applauding them for giving up their colonies and allowing self-determination of the Indian subcontinent to be 2 separate states. That's exactly what happened when Pakistan was created. So for him to say that somehow Britain was responsible for the conflict is an inversion of reality. The conflict has erupted because Pakistan refuses to accept the notion that India, a Hindu state, is far more economically superior. It won't accept the fact that there's a dispute of Kashmir area, and it won't accept the fact that it itself, Pakistan, an Islamic State, is inferior economically and politically to other states that are not Islamic. And that goes to the core of the problem that gives rise to radical Islam. The belief somehow that the West is responsible for the fact that Muslim countries are on the low end of the economic and political totem pole, that we are the conspiratorial suppressors of their lack of technological and economic progress, when in fact it is they themselves who have held themselves back. No industrial revolution, no renaissance, no economic revolution, no free markets. That's what's held them back, because they still believe in some of the Quranic precepts that the world is still flat and absent. Look, one interesting statistic. What profession do you think is the least represented in the Muslim world compared to the Western world? There are two professions. This is not a trick question. All right? You've double jeopardy, so I'll tell you what the answer is. The two professions that are least represented in the Muslim world are, one, psychiatrists, and two, comedians.
We have another question over here. Rosemary?
Hi, I'm Rosemary Sarah Steve. Nice to meet you, even if it's on Skype. The King of Saudi Arabia said that they'll be in England next month, in America the month after. Can I have your input on that? And are we doomed?
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to repeat the question because it didn't come through clearly, okay?
I'm sorry. The King of Saudi Arabia said that they will be in Britain in 1 month and in America the second month. Do you agree with that? And are we doomed? ISIS, I'm sorry. And are we doomed?
Well, to your last point, if we were doomed, I wouldn't be doing this work. I'd be living in San Diego and being a surfer, okay? So
that's good to hear.
It's a measure of optimism, and whether that was placed or not, I can't tell you. Number two, I think the fact is Saudi Arabia itself is in great jeopardy, because the reality is that al-Baghdadi, the new would-be head of the caliphate, that is the new Islamic State, sees himself first conquering the Islamic world, the Sunni states of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Egypt. Then he sees himself using the larger Islamic State as conquering Europe. So, in fact, while there is an element of truth, the Saudis are really in a very serious predicament, because according to informal polling that's been done by the CIA, a vast majority of Saudi citizens who are Sunnis actually support the Islamic State, or ISIS. So King Abdullah, King Hussein, King Abdullah of Jordan, King of Saudi Arabia, the leaders of UAE are all frightened to death that the growth of ISIS is going to soon lead to the encroachment on their territory and take over their regimes. That happens, the next step will be Europe. So I think that there is an element of truth. There's also the issue of the 1,500 or so fighters in quotes, who have volunteered to fight for ISIS from Western countries, including the United States, which means they have passports. They can go back to the US or to Europe to carry out acts of terrorism. And this is the conundrum we face. If we only apply a minimal amount of force against ISIS, they will start to strike back against the United States, because we will not have been able to decorate them, have left them intact, and give them reasons to attack us. So unless we decimate unless we destroy, and that means boots on the ground, to support the comparable to what Nazis in 1939. Unless we destroy them completely, we're going to be facing a world war with advanced weapons that they're trying to get and make it, that will see destruction of population on the level we haven't seen since World War II.
All right, Steve, we're getting a weak signal. We've got one more question, and then we invite you to hang out if you want to hang out. But you also have to introduce Sarah before you leave. So hang on a second. One more question, ma'am.
Yeah, my name is Evelyn.
Hang on. Go ahead.
I commend you for having the courage to publicly say a comparison between Hamas and ISIS. It's something that the media has not been very open about. They've condemned ISIS but have not condemned Hamas the same way. The same about the execution of the Hamas people by the Hamas followers in Gaza. Do you have any feelings about the President's position in his friendship towards the Arab nations and his sudden dissociation from Israel in comparison to previous regimes? It seems like he's really pandering to the Arab nations and to their followers even here in America, and is distancing himself from any supporters of Israel, who remains the only supporter of American philosophy, policies, and democracy in the Middle East.
You know what, Steve?
You know, I couldn't agree with you more. I've written about this on our website, the investigative.org. Fact is, this administration during the Israeli war held off our missiles, held intelligence, forced Israel to agree 10 ceasefires, 9 of which were broken by Hamas, and also appointed Qatar, a state that is the main financial sponsor of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al-Qaeda, as principal interlocutor and negotiator between Israel, Egypt, and Hamas. Appointing such a state as an ally of the U.S. is a disgrace. The fact remains, as you pointed out, Israel is the best ally of the United States, not just in the Middle East, but in the world today. And for us to turn our backs on our best ally that be attacked on almost all 3 borders by rockets, by terrorists, almost every single day is a disgrace. And we owe it to ourselves, to our history, to our values, to support Israel. Not because anybody who is Jewish or not Jewish, not because of any religion, but because it's the right moral thing to do as Americans. And that's what we've been
All right, that's the end of our question hour. And now, Steve, hang in there a second. I'm going to turn it back over to the president of the club, Phil Orenstein.
Well, when you get a chance, I'd like to introduce Sarah, but she is a one-man army who has accomplished more for the state of Israel
It's coming up in about a minute and a half. Go ahead, Phil, take it away.
Well, I just want to say to Steve, on behalf of the Queens Village Republican Club, we know you're very busy, you have a very tight schedule, and we really appreciate you coming on, video live for us, and we're all behind you. We support you 100% in all the work that you do. We feel it's very important. This was a very enlightening half hour with you. Please, stay around for the rest of the event with Sarah Stern. And now if you'll kindly say a few words about Sarah Stern, since you know her and work with her. We thank you so much from the bottom of our heart.
Go ahead, Steve.
I can see that all of you have been paid by my mother to be entertainer. And I want you to know, Ma, if you're watching, No, I'm still not married, okay? Having said that, Sarah Stern, I've known for most of the time I've been in Washington, the last 30 years. I've been at her home many times. I know her and her husband, Buddy, who is a doctor, Mike. She is a phenomenal woman with talents, energy, and ability to far surpass 99% of all other organizations that promote themselves as being defenders and promoters of the state of Israel. She goes far, dollar for dollar, more effective than any other organization I think of. And so I'm proud to call her a friend, a colleague, a leader in the community, and someone who had a true, major, and significant impact in Washington in truly assuring and preserving the security of the state of Israel. So you are very, very lucky to have Sarah speak to you tonight.
I am truly humbled, Steve. Thank you so much. Coming from you. You know, that's like having one of my gods give me a compliment. It's really amazing. All right. So,
Steve, are you hanging in or are you
leaving?
Well, with compliments like that, I have to hang in.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. I think what we are facing today, both America, the United States, and Israel, are greater threats than any threats we have ever faced before in our history. I think in America, this is much, much more difficult. The kind of things that Steve has spent his entire life documenting is much more difficult than the communist threat, because after all, the communists didn't believe in God. You know, and they didn't believe that if they blew themselves up, they would get 74 virgins and Allah. And they didn't think that blowing themselves up was a smart thing. You know, they cared about, you know, things like mutual assured destruction. We don't have this in today's threat from the Islamic world, from the world of radical Islam. And, you know, we look at the Nazi threat. That was a standing army. We knew how to defeat a standing army. But how do you defeat people who, just by the click of a mouse, can be in their basement, these lone wolves, and they could read Inspire magazine, you know, or they could go listen to a mosque somewhere, anywhere in the United States right now, and some of the teachings that they get and that they give to their students, they might as well be learning the stuff in Riyadh, you know, or in Tehran, you know, because the kind of things that we're seeing today that Steve has documented, especially on our college campuses, when people think the Muslim Students Association is like some Christian Brothers Association or some Hillel, you know, and when the Hillel students usually want to dialogue with them, they want to have some interfaith things. And the Muslim Students Association, which is a branch, the first branch of CARE in the United States, you know, basically, they want to destroy us. They want to destroy Western civilization from within. And they use this deception. So this is a much bigger challenge than we've been ever confronted with. And what's even worse is that we are a people whose whole country was founded on religious freedom and religious liberties. And the Constitution is the most sacred document that we have. And they are hiding behind our constitutional freedoms. And this is a radical expansionist ideology that is also wrapped up in a religion. And how do we, I know that my father came here seeking religious freedom, how do we, who cherish religious freedoms, attack this? So this is a much greater problem that our generation is confronted with than even our parents' generations were confronted with the threat of Nazism and communism. And there are so many things that we have got to understand and face. And we have people coming over here, Muslim students who take Arabic 101. And what they are basically professional insiders, professional instigators. And our students are not prepared for this. Our students, unfortunately, on the college campuses, if they take a class, especially the Title funded programs in the Middle Eastern Studies, which our taxpayers' dollars go to, and they have been so radicalized since 1978 when Edward Said wrote the book Orientalism. Orientalism was supposed to be like sexism or racism, and he said that you have absolutely no authority, no authenticity to speak about the Muslim and Arab world unless you're an Arab. So people like Ephraim Karsh or Bernard Lewis aren't real authorities on the Arab and Muslim world. So it revolutionized what's being taught in the college classroom. So what we have is a very biased, one-sided education, which almost puts an intellectual legitimacy on the anti-Israel hatred that's going out on the college campus. So we have so many more challenges than we've ever had before, I think, in our nation's history. And we really want to preserve our Constitution, and we want to preserve our religious freedoms and our religious liberties. But how do we do this when we know that even if just 10% of the 1.5 billion Muslims in the world are radical and are teaching this in our shores? And so we have big, big challenges. And thank God I have wonderful mentors like Steve Emerson and Frank Gaffney and Daniel Pipes. And we're not in this alone, we're in this together. And we really have got to brainstorm and to really fight. And not be asleep at the wheel of history, and to know history, and to appreciate, what it is that both America and Israel are up against. Now, I could speak for hours and hours about Obama and how our American foreign policy is so upside down and backwards and so wrong. And unfortunately, the grand deception it ended before, we can really expose what President Obama has shown his true colors as in the second administration. And I think, we can do a follow-up if you can, and you could talk about the Obama White House and the kind of people that are being let in from CARE and from ISNA. And by the way, this past weekend, Labor Day weekend, in Detroit, Michigan, there was a huge ISNA conference where they had thousands and thousands of people. And unfortunately, Jimmy Carter spoke to them. And Jimmy Carter, who wants to take Hamas off the State Department's list of terrorist organizations, and he says that they are a legitimate political player now. This is so disgusting. But unfortunately, even within our own Republican Party, Governor Rick Snyder came and addressed them because there are many, many Muslims in Michigan. And the problem is, under Obama, he is letting in many, many more Muslims, and he said that you can just have a limited amount of support for terrorism to come in now. Which is ridiculous. What does that mean? Limited amount of support for terrorism. What, you can purchase the rifle but you don't fire it? What does that mean? It's insane. But on the other hand, he is limiting the visas for Israelis that are coming in because he doesn't like the fact that they sell Dead Sea products in our malls, and that some of them have extended their visas. I mean, it is so absolutely horrific. But here, this little teeny tiny state of Israel, which is really America's best ally in the world, if you look at the United Nations voting record and America's voting record, there are no two nations that are more parallel in the United Nations. This little teeny has been so blackmailed by the Obama administration. I mean, when we had Secretary of State John Kerry going over there and basically threatening Prime Minister Netanyahu and his team that if they don't arrive at their two-state solution, which would include all of Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, if you will, and these indefensible borders, then he was going to be inviting more boycott, divestment, and sanctions throughout the world. And he said, everybody's going to look at you as though you're an apartheid state. And he once said, what do you want? Are you asking for another intifada? Are you asking, is that what you want? So it's almost like giving the American legitimacy to more violence against Jews. And it's almost giving legitimacy to the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. So it's either, this is like a bifurcation. You take this whole package where the West Bank is given up, or Judea and Samaria, and you saw how the missiles were raining in on Tel Aviv. Well, if Israel were to give back that whole chunk of land, Kalkilia would be just a few kilometers away from Ben Gurion Airport. And it would make the entire Jewish state totally indefensible. And we saw with this war, I have to say, in 2005, I was in Israel before the Gaza withdrawal, and I remember how it absolutely ripped apart the entire nation, and it divided Jew against Jew, and it was awful. Israeli soldiers were made to feel like robots, to rip Jews from their homes, and people were saying to me, Sarah, this will prove to the world once and for all just how far Israel is willing to go for the sake of peace. We are going to offer the Palestinians statehood and sovereignty. And Jewish millionaires bought the greenhouses to give to the Palestinians, saying this way they could have some sort of an economic infrastructure, some kind of a basis for their nascent Palestinian state. And rabbis were saying, why don't we leave the synagogues? Because after all, we all pray to the same God. They could be made into mosques. Well, the minute the blue and white flag of the IDF was lowered, and the last IDF soldier closed the gate and locked the door, they destroyed all of those synagogues, and they destroyed all of those greenhouses in what was just an atmosphere of hate-infested anarchy. And this is what we have. So after we've gone through this with Gaza, how could Israel possibly take a chance and give back all of Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank? I mean, you see with the Arab Spring how the Arab world changes tides so quickly, and how one minute you have the Muslim Brotherhood in, then there's a takeover. So even if the PA, just assuming the PA is a good cop, which I don't believe that, and I never have for a moment, but people say the PA is much more moderate, the PA is the good cop, Hamas is the bad cop. Okay, well withdraw, let's let the PA take over. Well, that's so absurd, because first of all, the PA, on one hand, just went into a power-sharing agreement with Hamas, and second of all, after the war, in Judea and Samaria, the polls of the Palestinians are all very much in favor of Hamas. So how are we taking our one little democratic ally in the Middle East, which has always been the most stable, the eyes and ears for the United States, and we're making it so vulnerable? I don't get it. I just don't get it. Machiavelli said, you keep your friends at a distance and you keep your enemies close. I think Obama says you keep your enemies close, or you grovel towards them, and you throw your friends under the bus. And that is what Israel is doing right now. They have been totally thrown under the bus by this administration, and I think that the American people are beginning to feel it. I think with the Islamic State, maybe they don't get that there's no distinction between the Islamic State or ISIS and Hamas. Maybe they haven't connected the dots that far, but they remember that there was a time when America was respected. And I have to tell you, my favorite moment was in 2000 and the Arab Spring, I should remember, the Cedars Revolution in Lebanon, when Christians felt free enough to walk proudly through the streets of Beirut, Lebanon without fear because they knew that someone sat in the Oval Office named George W. Bush who cared about the rights of religious minorities and freedoms, and they knew we had already gone into Iraq and Afghanistan, and they knew that we were willing to back up our beliefs with political might. And unfortunately, contrast this to today, where we have a president who had his hot mic moment and said, when it came to talking to the Russians about missile defense, he said, we'll wait until after the elections. We are looking like patsies. We've absolutely gutted our military budget. The North Koreans have followed us through the, and went and basically buzzed a plane, an American air defense plane. Putin is annexing the Ukraine. They want an independent Russian state in Ukraine. It is horrible because when America is strong, then America is like the moral compass of the world. Like Ronald Reagan said, that shining city on the hill. But when America is weak, all of the cockroaches are crawling out of the woodwork at once, and we see everybody is willing to fill the void of leadership. So I hope and pray that we can all go forth and tell the truth about what CARE, ISNA, the Muslim Students Association, the Students for Justice in Palestine, and all these organizations are. You've been educated tonight by Steve's brilliant film, and I really hope that you can tell people what is going on. I also have to say, CARE, the Council for American Islamic Relations, has gotten extraordinarily politically sophisticated and savvy, and they have an internship program. I see them. We're on Capitol Hill all the time. Myself and Jennifer and Adam Turner and others, we see CARE has made a presence, and they have an internship program. They have student interns that answer the phone for members of Congress. I mean, this is very, very scary because they have managed to basically insinuate themselves into positions of power in this country. But we really have got to wake up, and we can't fall for any of this dawah and this interfaith dialogue because they are really trying to pull the wool over us. Thank you very much.
It's late, and please bear with us, but I know people do have questions, so please fire away.
Sarah, how does a frustrated Catholic wake up their church to communicate with their parishioners as to what is going on in the Middle East and here? They just don't want to touch it.
I think education. I think there are lots, in America, we still believe if you know the good, you'll follow it, like Socrates said. And if there's a way to expose them, I don't know, some people just offer these walls of resistance, and Rosemary and I could trade about which is worse, our liberal Jewish friends or our Catholic friends, our sleeping Catholics. But it's very, very hard to penetrate it because they seem to have a block, a mental block. But what we have just experienced with Stephen Satloff and Jim Foley should begin to wake them up. And what just happened in Syria, they are mowing down, and the Islamic State or ISIS were just executing so many Christians in Syria. And I really don't understand this. I have to say, in terms of what is going on with the Christian populations and the way they've been brutalized by the Muslim populations in the Middle East, and the way they are trying to flee, the way they're persecuted, why doesn't the Pope talk more about that and go to history? I don't understand that. But I don't want to criticize the Pope. I have enough business criticizing the Jews.
We have another comment.
We're on the heels of another 9/11.
Right. Well, danger. I don't know this as much as Steve would know this, because I do more foreign policy. Steve, do you think that another 9/11 is imminent?
For the anniversary.
You know, Sarah, it's let me say two things. But in reference to the previous question, Christians, the reality is that Winston Churchill in 1938, before he became prime minister, as he saw the Nazi, roller coaster start gobbling up Poland and Czechoslovakia, made a very prescient statement saying that democracies act when there's blood in the streets. The corollary being democracies don't act when there's no blood. And so it was 9/11 that woke us up. Even though I testified in 1998 that we were destined to become the victim of a Bin Laden plot to topple the World Trade Center because in 1993 he didn't finish the job. But no one listened because we didn't want to believe that. If you look at the Middle East today, the Christian population has dwindled by more than 80% over the last 2 decades. The only country in which the Christian population has grown by upwards of 4 and 5% per year is Israel, which has taken in tens of thousands of Christian Arabs from around the Middle East because of the persecution of them in countries, surrounding countries, in Syria, in Egypt, in other countries, where, or in Pakistan, where they are being persecuted and being hung for being quote apostates. So I think the Christian church, the Catholic Church, has to wake up to this. And the second thing I'll say is that it's impossible to predict terrorist acts. One suicide bomber can ruin your day. And in fact, we don't know what will happen. The CIA and the FBI simply are unable to determine the severity of the threat of ISIS because they don't know how many American volunteers are in Syria and Iraq today who are returning back to the United States with the same combat experience and the hatred of the United States in the exact same situation that occurred in the 1980s when American Muslim volunteers went to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets and came back and then ended up trying to topple the World Trade Center in 1993. It's deja vu all over again. So is there an imminent threat? I don't think we have an imminent threat of a 9/11, but we do have a threat of isolated and increased frequency of individual acts of terrorism, like Nidal Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter, who killed 18 people and who was charged only with workplace violence and not terrorism because of a political decision by the Department of Justice. That's the type of terrorism we're going to increasingly face today.
Thank you, Steve. We have a few more questions. One right here.
Yes, great seeing you, Sarah. I think you really can't compare today's threat by radical Islam to communism because the crucial difference is political correctness today, which didn't exist then. It was a common enemy that all of America was facing, and we wanted to all eradicate it. Now, because of electing people like Obama to be president, people are afraid to breathe the wrong way against any religious group, even a religious group whose radicals espouse such horrible things. This is the biggest problem. But my question is, echoing this young lady, it's great that you're here. This is a Republican club. Can you get out to the Democratic clubs, to the churches, to the conservative and reform synagogues, and inform the people who really need to watch this film and be informed?
We have to work on that. We really have to. I mean, these people, we have to wake up people. We have to wake up America. And what you said before in terms of the reluctance to acknowledge the problem, CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood were brilliant when they invented the term Islamophobic, borrowing from the homosexual movement, you know, homophobic. And nobody wants to be looked at like you're a racist or you're sexist or you're homophobic, so we can't be Islamophobic. So we can't talk about the threat. And so all of a sudden politically they are brilliant. But,
Yeah,
you know what? I think what we have to do is say, yes, I am a proudly Islamophobe because I have a fear of the true intentions of Islam. I'm not scared of you label me an Islamophobic. I want to be called Islamophobic because I understand that I am phobic of the Islamists' intentions. Not all, you know, we know people like Sudi Jasser, but of the radical Islamist intentions, yes, that's a rational fear.
But you're using political correctness to muzzle the country, and they're widely
That's right.
successful.
That is exactly right. And we have to wake them up. I mean, I think all of us have to look upon ourselves as intellectual revolutionaries. They have been asleep at the wheel of history, and we have to wake them up. This is our civilization. It's not just Israel. It's all of Western civilization that they're attacking. They're attacking, they hate America. Israel's just the minor Satan. America's the great Satan. That's just the appetizer on their way to the main course. And we owe it to our children and our grandchildren to wake up people and to recognize the threat. Yes.
We have one last question.
What?
For that gentleman in the back.
I'm sorry, it's been late.
Hi, Michael Mulaney. I was wondering, since Obama refuses to secure the border, do you think these radical Islamic terrorists can come across the southern border?
Yeah, Hezbollah has huge bases in Central and South America, and they blend in with the South American population, and they're coming into the borders. And I think this is so scary. You know, we don't want to, God forbid, round up people and put them in concentration camps. But what are we going to do with people that want to undermine our very way of life, that are infiltrating through our borders and are so savvy and sophisticated in the way they infiltrate into the corridors of power? It's horrible. It's really, really scary. So we know the problem. How we deal with this enemy from within, is very difficult. It's very difficult, but they are coming in droves, really. Steve's the expert in all of this. He knows
On behalf of Phil and the rest of the board and the club, we thank both of you for taking invaluable time. You know, when